co-host, the co-investigators for Kachawidaikuna, and I had invited our co-PIs to kind of give them a little bit of the update on Kachawidaikuna that we started last time and then sort of went a different direction, which is fine if this happens this time as well. So I just wanted to welcome everyone, and then as Richard always encourage us, maybe we can sort of go around and introduce ourselves. I see Nick Hewa is here also. Hi, Nick.
How's
So
it
this is,
going?
yeah, so this is a great opportunity to sort of update on Kachawi Daikuna projects and also talk, reflect on Kadin Navarro's visits to different classes, and perhaps Terry, contextualize again what other things Kadin is doing in the context of her residency, that sort of pull everything, together in sort of a nested or meaningful way as we kind of think about like the context of the broader project. So why don't we? I'll pass it over to Richard, and why don't you kick us off with some introductions, maybe, Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I think we should introduce ourselves to each other. I think that would be great. I did want to just take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we are doing something different in our Unlearning Hour this semester, and that we invited Cadine Navarro, an artist who has an installation at the Frank Museum in Otterbein University, and her collaborators to take over the Unlearning Hour. So this is called the Seed Takeover. And in the framework of that act of hospitality, I think it's very important when we have Cachuela Cuna involved faculty and participants to acknowledge that space, this is kind of a space where both things are happening, really. And so, and I think one of the requests that we had from Terry, who is here as part of that group, I'm just looking through anyone else. No, I mean, Peter's been involved as well as myself and Michelle, that we used this meeting today or this session today to think of overlapping interests. And as Michelle said, this has been overlapping in very formal terms in terms of class visits with the artist as well, but also in terms of the methodologies that are being used. The Kadeen's work is about deep listening. It is about non-human interactions. It's to do with a certain pedagogy of the land, as it were. And while a non-Indigenous artist herself, there is this sense of acknowledging and learning from Indigenous epistemologies and pedagogies. And so this is an exciting moment in the takeover because it is a sense in which now Kadeen and their group kind of can listen to what we're doing and the history of Cachuela Cuna a little bit. But I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's still a takeover, and it's still a sense in which we are in those dialogues. Oh, and Alcira was also part of last week too, as well. So she's been involved in that process as well. But let's do introductions, and then I just wanted to kind of lay that out as an important acknowledgement of what we're doing here. I'm Richard Fletcher, Associate Professor in the Department of Arts Administration, Education and Policy, and I have been a member of Cachuela Cuna since its founding. And I was actually trying to think, Michelle, how that happened, and I was really kind of thinking back to that time, like, why me? Why? When did our conversations start? Because I was at that time really in transition from my former department in classics to doing more work on unlearning and Indigenous arts. And so I think for me, it's kind of interesting to look back to that period. And the Unlearning Hour developed out of a reading group called This Decoloniality, which was the reading of a book by Walter Mignolo and Catherine Walsh. And it became this space of reflection on methodologies across the university. but and also how it kind of informs our curriculum as well, which I think has been important too. So I'll pass on to you, Michelle, and then we can go around and introduce ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Richard. For those of you watching the recording, I think everybody here kind of knows who I am, but just in case, Michelle Wibblesman, Associate Professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese here at The Ohio State University. And yes, as I think back on how did we get together, we have this amazing team of co-PIs that have come together by way of different types of projects. With precedence in, for instance, the Humanities Institute, Continuity and Change in the Andes and Amazonia group, that then resulted in a coming together in a conference during the Indigenous Languages and Cultures of Latin America conference in 2016. There was a performance as pedagogy group also under Humanities Institute that brought some of us together. And then, of course, our individual projects, that each one of us has sort of participated in, finding those types of intellectual affinities. It was extraordinary the way that we came together, actually, and I think that is one thing that, as we think about updates and where we've been and where we're headed, the team of co-PIs, which I continue to refer to as a dream team, has been incredible, in terms of the productivity of the group. Productivity that lasted throughout the pandemic, where we thought things were going to slow down because Cachahuillaicuna, which is the name means messages with beauty, very focused on indigenous art, and material cultural production and performance as sites of indigenous meaning making and memory practices. But the original proposal under the Global Arts and Humanities Discovery theme was for artist residencies, just sort of making a point that having, talking about studying indigenous cultures, having art exhibits was not enough, that we needed to truly engage with indigenous artists themselves. And then the pandemic happened, and we thought things were going to suspend, but instead they really took off. I mean, we had like an incredibly productive virtual interaction with indigenous artists that is now leading into collaborations moving forward, hopefully in person. So since I have the floor, let me just go ahead and mention those. I have to leave a little bit early, so I'll say that before I pass the introductions. In terms of where we've been this year, we've had collaborations with Columbus Printed Arts and the Potu Faitaitusi Reading Room, with Guarani Indigenous editors, spearheaded by Richard Fletcher. We had virtual concerts and collaborations with Awana, Red de Artistas Interculturales Comunitarios. So it's a network of indigenous community artists, very supported through the Center for Latin American Studies. So Mark, thank you so much for being here, and for all of the support that we received from class, both through the Cachahuillaicuna project, but then supplementing, funds to continue projects once those relationships were established. We had Sebastián Calfuqueo here in 2019, and Gisela Latorre was absolutely instrumental in bringing this artist to Columbus. And then with Center for Latin American Studies and the Advanced Center for the Advanced Computing Center for the Arts and Design, ACAD, we established a centers collaboration that is bringing Sebastián back for another artist residency. Part of our commitment to a continuity, of relationships with indigenous artists, so it's not a one-off thing, but an enduring relationship. We had the workshops with Pachaysana Institute, 2 series of workshops last autumn and last spring that were incredibly successful and that have continued to inform our pedagogies in the classroom. The Kausai Ukunchai Andean and Amazonian indigenous art and cultural artifact research collection has exploded. It started with one student, and now we have 8 student curators. We've held open houses, and now we are in a position to develop significantly our online presence and relaunch, a lot of the workshops. All of those students do individual research projects that sort of bring together the research, the experience in the collection, and then also public-facing projects in collaboration with interdisciplinary networks across campus. We worked with Cassandra Press, producing the Cassandra Press Reader on indigeneity and Blackness in the Americas. Sue Kalt from Roxbury College participated in a Yachai Shimi project that brought together OSU students with Roxbury College, which is a minority serving institution, and the Indigenous Languages Archives at UT Austin, and indigenous artists that continue to be in contact with the Kausayu Kunchai research collection. And there are a few others, in there. The Our Unlearning Hour, of course, continued, and then Richard's Dear Fellow Settler Colonizer radio show continued, sort of all connected, not necessarily that it was a Cachawilla Kuna project, but it kind of connects into a lot of our discussions. And I know this is super fast, but just to give you a heads up about the upcoming sort of things, we still have some funds, and so we have maximized our funding and leveraged funding to create programming. So the last remaining funds that we have are going to be allocated to 2 artist residencies in the fall. One is they both bring to fruition projects that were underway and got stalled during the pandemic. So one is that our masks, Dancing with Devils, Latin American mask traditions, was supposed to be an in-presence, exhibit, got shut down by the pandemic, pivoted towards a virtual online exhibit, and now we're bringing it back as an in-person, exhibition in collaboration with the Barnett Center. So we're very excited about that. And we're excited to bring 2 not necessarily indigenous, but 2 artists. One is a mask maker, and another one is a dancer, and also with a depth of knowledge of the history of the Diablada in Pijaro, which our very own Leonardo Carrizo does photographic journalism there. So that's very exciting. And Mark, I kind of put that out there. We're still in conversation with Center for Latin American Studies and other funding sources to make sure that we have the proper resources to host these artists. It also brings us back to an original thought, which is to look at the original, producers of certain materials or artists that are not necessarily in the mainstream. People like mask makers, in terms of the folk traditions, right? And then the other residency that we hope to host in the fall has to do with an Andean violin methods manual that Center for Latin American Studies supported the research and publication of this manual. The manual is out, and Mark, actually, I was in touch with Atika Chimuel this morning. He is starting on volume 2, so this is really exciting. But we have an invitation and willingness from Eugenia Costa-Giomi, interim director of the School of Music at OSU, to really make a robust programming in collaboration with an artist residency, music ed students, and also an orchestral piece that Atika Chimuel has composed, performed by the OSU Orchestra. So that's sort of our vision for that particular residency. So the group continues, and again, as Richard mentioned, I think that the biggest thrust of Cachawilla Kuna is to have these conversations, develop these networks, with folks like Terry, with Kadeen, different universities, and to keep in mind this idea of methods amplification, right? Curricular implementation of some of the things that we learn, by way of our interactions with different artists. So sorry to be long-winded. I thought I'd just get it out there, and since we were trying to get the updates last time, but I wanted to just sort of keep everybody informed and also provide that broader context, for the conversations that we're having this semester in terms of the Seed Takeover and Cadine Navarro's really amazing work. The students have been really impacted, Cadine, by your presence in the classrooms and the conversations that you've initiated. So with that said, let me pass it to Cadine for introductions, and then Cadine, you can kind of pass on to other people.
Michelle, before we do that, I think it's really important that we acknowledge the focus of Cachuela Cuna being Andean and Amazonian. At the same time, throughout our work, there has been an attempt to situate ourselves where we are in Ohio, within the in attention to like the removed tribes, in attention to Turtle Island in general, and that has meant that certain of our initiatives have been pulling us away away from the Andean and Amazonian context and putting us into dialogue with other indigenous groups and also other projects which might kind of inform that. And I think that because I think if we go straight, I mean, I'm not saying not to go straight to Cadine now, but like it's interesting that the Seed Takeover stemmed not from an Andean and Amazonian focus, but for a more general attention to listening and attention to indigenous practices that kind of operate in a kind of global sense that have been very core to Cachuela Cuna as well. So on that reflection, I just didn't want Cadine to have to jump in and say something in relation to the Andean and Amazonian specific contexts and residencies that we've had, but that we are looking at the kind of broader elements there.
Yeah, and Cadine, just also to chime in with Richard's framing, the second phase of Cachahuida Cuna specifically was designed, thinking about how do we maintain sort of like some sort of an anchor, with a programming that we're developing around Andean and Amazonian studies, but with a very outward facing, sort of global indigenous and just global artist, sort of perspective. So that's sort of the idea, is to sort of bring those conversations about, and also between academics and artists. So yes, so I'll just mention that we have that in kind of a thought out way in the design of the next phases of Cachahuida Cuna.
Wow. There are so many seeds being planted just already right now. Yeah, absolutely. This is so interesting, and such rich soil actually to be thinking about these ideas and exchanging. And I see all these connections happening, like mycelium growing underneath the soil. But so yeah, again, I'm Cadine Navarro, and I'm currently a land-based artist resident in Ohio with a show at the Frank Museum of Art called It Sounds Like Love, which features the designs created by the sound vibration of 9 native Ohio seeds. And so what the show is connecting to is the relationship that we can have to the voices of human and more than human community here locally and globally. So and thanks to the fact that the entire show is a landscape, it's on the ground, it is the floor of the museum, and that we can come in and take off our shoes and walk upon the work, gives a literal platform upon which we may exchange experience and voice and conversation and ideas, and listen to ourselves and to the sounds and the voices of the seeds also present within the space, and consider what the impact of that might be. And it gives the opportunity for us to invite many, many people of many diverse backgrounds and affinities into the space, and to have an embodied experience, which we feel is really important for actual learning and creating a kind of a shift in the way, in our perspectives, is to have an embodied experience. And so what's happening is, little by little, through the many, many iterations, and we've had 20 plus events so far, are interesting responses that are, that are coming from these experiences, and also a type of emergent learning that is also coming from these experiences of sharing, and alternative kind of notions of how to navigate. So I don't know, it's featuring these 9 native seeds, and in a way it seems to be also spreading seeds and planting seeds for long-term intentions and connections across cultures and beings. So so with that being said, maybe Terry, would you like to take the baton?
This is really fascinating. I think the Seed Takeover is an experiment in itself. Can what's happening with prairie seeds connect to all the wonderful things that Michelle and you were listening there? Are there layers of meaning that we can tap into because of Gadine's show? So, I mean, I'm Terry Hermson. I'm Jubilado from Otterbein. My background is in poetry, but currently I'm a climate activist in Central Ohio, and my biggest goal beyond anything is to see if we can get climate change action productive in this territory. So the reason I found myself drawn to this forum is that I think we need to radically change how we see the earth and how we relate to the earth. And I felt that connection in Gadine's show. I've seen it in so many people who have come. And so in some ways, I think decolonializing our minds and our hearts has to do with listening in a different way. And with extractivizing, that's a bad word. I see extractivism and colonialism as exactly happening here in Central Ohio as it is elsewhere. And the invisibility of the seeds and the voices that are not heard is, I think, what the show is tapping into. So I'm interested in how maybe it's off the screen of what this forum is supposed to be, but I'm interested in how it applies to how we think of the Adena culture near Newark and the ancient history there. We've been doing some investigation into that, and how does that connect to the massive sprawl and the erasure of the land that's right here in our midst. So if that's off to the side, that's fine, but what I'm taking away are things that I can apply to climate change action in Central Ohio, and that's why I'm so moved by this forum, by our conversations, and by the show. Something happens in that show which seems to transform people's connection to the earth and to listening more deeply, even to each other. So I find that exciting. So I will pass it to Elcira.
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you so much, Terry, for your very thoughtful, insightful presentation of introduction. And I'm going to pick up on what you said, because what this space has allowed me to do is to somehow begin to actualize something that has been always in the back of my mind as an academic, as a human being, as a scholar. And for some reason, I hadn't found the space before somewhere else. So my name is Alcira Dueñas. I teach history, Latin American history at Ohio State, Newark, precisely. And I am working with mostly colonial, late colonial, let's say, indigenous writings, indigenous voices in the courts of justice at that time. So I've been always close to those discussions and conversations about knowledge and how can we retrieve knowledge, and at the same time to begin to build new avenues to not only disseminate that knowledge, but also to somehow come together with the present voices and see how can we listen to the past voices and how the past voices of indigenous peoples are resonating today, right? And are we willing to listen? So that's why Kadeen's project to me was just so amazing, as I said some things already in the previous meeting, but it was a real call to listen, in my personal opinion, and to realize that when we teach in the classroom or whenever or whatever we teach, we should start by prompting the ability to listen, right? It's not so much about consuming words and consuming books and consuming, but let's just stop consuming for a moment, okay? And then see what we already have that we're either not using or ignoring altogether, or is dormant, right? Something that is dormant in the back of our lives, and we can always renew, reopen, and reiterate. So that's what I think I would say for now, just to express the potential of this space, right? That is, it's not just one space, it's multiple spaces, because all of us bring our own spaces and feelings and opinions and knowledge to this one space. So I really wanted to just leave it at that. And again, thank Richard and Michelle and all of you for making this possible and for making this a continuous space. Thank you. Oh, and I'll pass it to Gisela. Hello. It's been a long
Hi,
while.
Alcira. Hi, everyone. My name is Gisela Latorre. I'm a professor in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I have a background in art history, and I do work on art, muralism, social justice, and I wanted to kind of go back to, Richard's sort of comment about like how he got involved in Cachahuilla y Cuna. And I started thinking, how did I get involved? And this is the memory that I have. I went to one of those many discovery theme meetings where people were talking about, these are the grants, and then I see Michelle like talking about her plans. And so, and so I kind of like hovered like on, like where she was to kind of listen in. And then she brings me in and she welcomes me, and I just get wrapped up in her energy. And I said, I don't have much background in Indigenous art, but I want to learn. And that's what I've been doing. And I think Michelle has been driving a lot of that, that heart and passion in this project. And I think that I'm still in a place of learning, and I'm also, and just now I'm learning about Kadeen's work. And so I'm excited about that. And it's all, for me, what has been important is how Indigenous artists have, been able to kind of redefine our relationship to the environment, our relationship to each other, right? By insisting in these ideas of interconnection. And I think Kadeen's work kind of speaks to that as well, rather than kind of like thinking of ourselves as this individual bodies that move through the world and are contained and that have nothing to do with one another or with the environment. So anyway, yeah, so I'm excited. This is, I think, my first learning hour, so I'm excited too. It's, it's been a busy, crazy year for me. But anyway, nice meeting everyone, and nice seeing the folks that I had seen before. So. Michelle, I don't know if that's how you remember meeting me. I remember that meeting and you and just being like, kind of like taken over, like, in a very positive and loving way by you. That's my memory of it, but I don't know if that's the subjective memory. I have no idea.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but Richard, you have embarked us on sort of a memory journey, and it seems like we've done so much together since then and become such a tight community that it is hard to remember a point where we didn't know each other. We were just encountering each other. So, but I'm thrilled, Gisela, that we hit it off. I think that it's something about the chemistry among our team also that makes this project work. And Terry and Kadeen, I think that's where we connect as well, the enthusiasm. Terry, you're an inspiration in terms of that overwhelming enthusiasm to make things happen and to welcome Kadeen into this context. And I have to go, unfortunately, so I will watch the rest of this on the recording. I know Alcida had asked for maybe an update on the book project, and we might do that either here by way of Gisela and Richard or separately as we sort of continue to get through the introductions and the conversations. So I look forward to the recording and to seeing you all another time. Ciao, ciao.
Nice seeing you, Michelle. Take care.
And it's okay if our introductions take